And you're joining us live on Substack on Narativ.org as we're about to check into the press conference at the Alaskan summit between President Putin and President Trump. Let's take a listen to what's going on live on location as we just press a few buttons here to make sure all of that happens for us in the way we anticipate. In fact, it won't do what we are asking it to do. So let me put up full screen. Let's check into what's going on.
Good afternoon, dear neighbor. Very good to see you. In good health and to see you alive. I think that is very neighborly. And I think that's some kind words that we can say to each other. We're separated by the Strait of Bering, though there are 2 islands only between the Russian island and the U.S. island. They're only 4 kilometers apart. We're close neighbors, and it's a fact. It's also important that Alaska has to do with our common heritage, common history between Russia and the U.S., and many positive events have to do with that territory. Still, there is tremendous cultural heritage back from the Russian America. For example, Orthodox churches and a lot of more than 700 geographical names of Russian origin. During the Second World War, it was here in Alaska that was the origin of the legendary air bridge for the supply of military aircraft and other equipment under the Land-Lease program. It was a dangerous and treacherous route over the vast emptiness of ice. However, the pilots of both countries did everything to bring closer the victory. They risked their lives and they gave it all for the common victory. I was just in the city of Magadan in Russia, and there is a memorial there dedicated to the Russian and the U.S. pilots. And there are 2 flags, the U.S. flag and the Russian flag. And I know that here as well there is such a memorial. There is a military burial place several kilometers away from here. The Soviet pilots that buried there who died during that dangerous mission. We're thankful to the citizens and the government of the U.S. for carefully taking care of their memory. I think that's very worthy and noble. We'll always remember other historical examples when our countries defeated common enemies together in the spirit of battle camaraderie and allyship that supported each other and facilitated each other. I'm sure that this heritage will help us rebuild and foster mutually beneficial and equal ties at this new stage, even during the hardest conditions. It is known that there have been no summits between Russia and the U.S. for 4 years, and that's a long time. This time was very hard for bilateral relations, and let's be frank, they have fallen to the lowest point since the Cold War. I think that's not benefiting our countries and the world as a whole. It is apparent that sooner or later we had to amend the situation to move on from the confrontation to dialogue. And in this case, a personal meeting between the heads of state has been long overdue. Naturally, under the condition of serious and painstaking work, and this work has been done in general. Me and President Trump have very good direct contact. We've spoken multiple times. We spoke frankly on the phone. And Special Envoy of the President, Mr. Witkoff, traveled out to Russia several times. Our advisors and heads of foreign ministries kept in touch all the time. And you know fully well that one of the central issues was the situation around Ukraine. We see the strive of the administration and President Trump personally to help facilitate the resolution of the Ukrainian conflict. And his strive to get to the crux of the matter, to understand this history, is precious. As I've said, the situation in Ukraine has to do with fundamental threats to our security. Moreover, we've always considered the Ukrainian nation, and I've said it multiple times, a brotherly nation, however strange it may sound in these conditions. We have the same roots, and everything that's happening is a tragedy for us and terrible wound. Therefore, the country is sincerely interested in putting an end to it. At the same time, we're convinced that in order to make the settlement lasting and long-term, we need to eliminate all the primary roots the primary causes of that conflict, and we've said it multiple times, to consider all legitimate concerns of Russia and to reinstate a just balance of security in Europe and in the world on the whole. And I agree with President Trump, as he has said today, that naturally the security of Ukraine should be ensured as well. Naturally, we are prepared to work on that. I would like to hope that the agreement that we've reached together will help us bring closer that goal and will pave the path towards peace in Ukraine. We expect that Kiev and European capitals will perceive that constructively and that they won't throw a wrench in the works. They will not make any attempts to use some backroom dealings to conduct provocations to torpedo the nascent progress. Incidentally, when the new administration came to power, bilateral trade started to grow. It's still very symbolic. Still, we have a growth of 20%. As I've said, we have a lot of dimensions for joint work. It is clear that the U.S. and Russian investment and business cooperation has tremendous potential. Russia and the U.S. can offer each other so much in trade, digital, high-tech, and in space exploration. We see that Arctic cooperation is also very possible, and our international context, for example, between the Far East of Russia and the West Coast of the U.S. Overall, it's very important for our countries to turn the page, to go back to cooperation. It is symbolic that not far away from here, at the border between Russia and the U.S., there was a so-called international date line. I think you can step over, literally, from yesterday into tomorrow. And I hope we'll succeed in that, in political sphere. I would like to thank President Trump for our joint work, for the well-wishing and trustworthy tone of our conversation. It's important that both sides are result-oriented, and we see that the President of the U.S. has a very clear idea of what he would like to achieve. He sincerely cares about prosperity of his nation. Still, he understands that Russia has its own national interests. I expect that today's agreements will be the starting point, not only for the solution of the Ukrainian issue, but also will help us bring back business-like and pragmatic relations between Russia and the U.S. And in the end, I would like to add one more thing. I'd like to remind you that in 2022, during the last contact with the previous administration, I tried to convince my previous American colleague that the situation should not be brought to the point of no return when it would come to hostilities. And I said it quite directly back then, that it's a big mistake. Today, when President Trump saying that if he was the president back then, there will be no war. And I'm quite sure that it would indeed be so. I can confirm that. I think that overall, me and President Trump have built a very good business-like and trustworthy contact. And I have every reason to believe that moving down this path, we can come, and the sooner the better, to the end of the conflict in Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. That was very profound, and I will say that I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many, many points that we agreed on, most of them, I would say, a couple of big ones that we haven't quite gotten there, but we've made some headway. So there's no deal until there's a deal. I will call up NATO in a little while. I will call up the various people that I think are appropriate, and I'll, of course, call up President Zelensky and tell him about today's meeting. It's ultimately up to them. They're going to have to agree with what Marco and Steve and some of the great people from the Trump administration who've come here, Scott and John Radcliffe, thank you very much. But we have some of our really great leaders. They've been doing a phenomenal job. We also have some tremendous Russian business representatives here, and I think, you know, everybody wants to deal with us. We've become the hottest country anywhere in the world in a very short period of time, and we look forward to that. We look forward to dealing. We're going to try and get this over with. We really made some great progress today. I've always had a fantastic relationship with President Putin, with Vladimir. We had many tough meetings, good meetings. We were interfered with by the Russia hoax that made it a little bit tougher to deal with, but he understood it. I think he's probably seen things like that during the course of his career. He's seen it all. But we had to put up with the Russia hoax. He knew it was a hoax, and I knew it was a hoax. But what was done was very criminal. But it made it harder for us to deal as a country in terms of the business and all of the things that we'd like to have dealt with. But we'll have a good chance when this is over. So just to put it very quickly, I'm going to start making a few phone calls and tell them what happened. But we had an extremely productive meeting, and many points were agreed to. There are just a very few that are left. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, but we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there. I would like to thank President Putin and his entire team, whose faces, who I know in many cases, other than that, whose faces I get to see all the time in the newspapers. You're almost as famous as the boss, but especially this one right over here. But we had some good meetings over the years, right? Good, productive meetings over the years, and we hope to have that in the future. But let's do the most productive one right now. We're going to stop really 5, 6, 7,000, thousands of people a week from being killed, and President Putin wants to see that as much as I do. So, again, Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, that will be that. I don't know if they're taking any questions. It'll be really interesting to see if they take any questions under the banner of pursuing peace. Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump make statements and leave the room, not willing to accept any questions by the delegations of media that are there. Wow, that tells you a lot about the state of play of what went on today. There was no agreement between these two men on anything substantial today that came out of today's supposedly high-stakes summit. We have no ceasefire agreement. There will be conversations continuing. Vladimir Putin at the end there said, maybe next time in Moscow. They've discussed setting the table for future talks, but they haven't discussed how they've set that table. And they've talked about talking to NATO and talking to Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky in the near future. Now, none of that is very substantial or meaningful, confirming what many of us suspected, that today was going to be nothing more than puppet theater, Russian puppet theater. In fact, you heard Donald Trump refer to Vladimir Putin as the boss during that conversation. That is not just a slip of the tongue. That is, in fact, what Vladimir Putin is to Donald Trump. He is the boss in a mafia kind of way, the boss, as Donald Trump is often referred to as the boss by his contemporaries in the United States. This was a disaster on the international front for the United States to invite this war criminal, this person who has attacked Ukraine, who's caused so many deaths of so many people, both in his own army, but also the many, many people have died in Ukraine, to invite him onto American soil where he can advance his agenda, which included there, and by the way, many references to Alaska at the beginning of his comments there, talking about how Alaska and the Russia are so closely aligned. Of course, they were, but this was all a gift, an absolute gift to the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, who was able to then turned around and also led the press conference. If you notice that, he was the first person to speak at the press conference, followed then by Donald Trump. That is not the way international diplomacy works, but it is the way international diplomacy works, in this case, when Vladimir Putin is the boss of Donald Trump, and it's his summit, and it's his choreography, it's his everything that took place today. What a slap in the face for America, what a absolute embarrassment for Donald Trump. He will be going home today not only empty-handed, but embarrassed by the man who he calls the boss, the man who attacked American democracy in 2015 by installing Donald Trump as a Manchurian candidate, and the same man who attacked Ukraine, a sovereign country, and has caused so much death and destruction. The world will look on this moment as absolutely abysmal, but it is better, I suppose, than what it could have been, which is that they could have announced that they had peace in our time, which is what they were setting up for, a potential Chamberlain-like moment where we have peace in our time. Well, we will not have peace in our time as long as Vladimir Putin is still the head of the Federation of Russia. And what's really important now is that people at home call their senators, call their Congress people, absolutely demand that those sanctions that are sitting in the Senate, 80% of the Senate, 80 co-sponsors on this one bill to extend Russian sanctions against Russia. Well, they're sitting there and waiting to vote on that bill. Let's get that bill passed and through Congress. It's high time that Russian President Vladimir Putin is forced into stopping this war. And the only way he'll do that if there are sanctions against him on the oil sector, and if India and China are also sanctioned for buying oil from Russia. Those sanctions need to be put in place. And now is the time to press our Congress people to push that ahead, to get this in place as soon as possible. Not to mention, this was designed as a distraction, clearly, for the Epstein files, which continue to dog the president of the United States. But also, let me remind you, our exclusive the other day, where Vicky Ward told us that Putin and Epstein are connected to each other, and we will continue to expose that. In fact, coming up in our next episode, or the next chapter of The Greatest Heist, we'll reveal exactly how these two men you see in the picture right next to me, Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, are connected to each other, but also how they are connected to Jeffrey Epstein. It's time to get back to the Epstein. It's time to get back to the sanctions against Russia. Let's figure out the way to proceed with our agenda here, which is about how we continue to put pressure on this presidency to step down. Because what we really are seeing is a Manchurian candidate who leaves us no choice but to we can't lie about what we're seeing. We're seeing it in real time. What we're seeing is a puppet president of the United States who, again, after the embarrassment in Helsinki so many years ago, again comes out of this particular press conference and this summit looking like an understudy for Putin, like an absolute sub-president, not the leader of the free world. Is this what MAGA really wants? An American president that is stick-handled, that is a puppet, that is basically a dog at a leash for the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, who choreographed today's events, who led today's events, and who also, by the way, let me assure you, led the press conference at the end there, which is not what is normally done. This is proof, if you're ever looking for it, that Putin is in charge of Trump, that his view of making America great again is making America subservient to Russia, making America subservient to that sub-nation of Russia. It's a nation with the size of an economy that is dwarfed by California. This is the person who MAGA has chosen to lead America, a person who's was beholden to Vladimir Putin, who has a history of being involved with the Russian mob, a history of being a KGB asset. We'll be revealing all of that again in our greatest heist. And we encourage you to support all the independent journalists that are here on Substack, where a lot of the truth about this is being spoken, whether it's Dean Blundell, whether it's Olga Lautman, Lev Parnas, myself, anybody who's out there who are putting out the truth. This is the place to support right now, because we need to counter this remarkably thorough propaganda effort that is being put out by the mainstream media, where they're acting like this is nothing. Like they're acting like this is typical diplomacy going on. This is unbelievable. This is the hijacking of American foreign policy. This is the hijacking of the American presidency by a foreign adversary, by our number one enemy. And what they've done is they've captured everything about America, their ability to act as independent country on the world stage, our ability to use our moral authority to influence events in the world. This is why the people of Ukraine have been left to defend themselves alone without America's help, because Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, has controlled Donald Trump, has complete control of his lapdog, Donald Trump. It's high time that this is a clear to everybody, that we all understand exactly what we're dealing with here, and that both of these men are indeed connected to Jeffrey Epstein, are indeed connected to the human trafficking, but also to the trillions of dollars that have been stolen from the United States over the last 4 decades. This is the end of any doubt that we've had about who Donald Trump is. And if there are still viewers out there who believe that Donald Trump is somehow a respectable president or a real president of the United States, today would have disarmed you of any of those notions. Vladimir Putin is in charge of the United States presidency right now. It's as clear as anything that Donald Trump listens to everything he says. Couldn't stop complimenting this guy who's a murderer, who's a war criminal, who's caused the deaths of millions of people. It is high time that people stand up to Donald Trump and stand up for the people of Ukraine and begin enforcing these sanctions that are sitting in Congress right now. These sanctions should be passed immediately. And if Democrats don't seize this mantle right now and don't press really hard for those sanctions, then they too are complicit in all of this. Now is the time for those sanctions. It's time for Vladimir Putin to be isolated on the world stage. And the way to do that is through these sanctions. That's all I have to say tonight. Thank you for being here for our coverage, for both the original part of this day with Dean Blundell, Dean was on fire today. If you haven't seen that, go back and check it out. It's really good TV, but it's also very accurate about what's going on. You'll hear about the stakes of what's happening today, what really will lead us to, if this continued appeasement by Donald Trump of the Russian president, of this aggressor, Vladimir Putin, what this will lead us to is World War III. And your kids and your grandkids fighting wars that are not in your interests, fighting wars not for freedom, but fighting wars for tyrants, fighting wars for people like Vladimir Putin, the most unbelievable criminal in the world who has not only launched these wars, but is a dictator of the greatest note, working on behalf of the Chinese president as well, in order to create chaos around the world and to end democratic rights around the world. And I'm sorry I'm preaching a lot here today, but this is just the end of my patience with this administration. There is no room left for this kind of activity around the world, as people are dying in Ukraine on a daily basis. The attacks come every single night on Ukraine because our president, Donald Trump, has refused to arm them with sufficient weapons to allow them to deter those attacks by Vladimir Putin. And yet he gives Vladimir Putin the respectability of arriving in the United States and stepping foot on American soil when he is a war criminal, and then gives him the podium to preach whatever he wants to tell Donald Trump what the next situation is and what the next thing is about. This is it's the end of moral America. It's the end of moral authority of America if we allow this to continue. And every senator knows this, and every congressperson knows this, and more importantly, every American knows this. And it's time for Americans to call their congresspeople and to put them on notice that if they don't support these sanctions bills that is currently in the Senate and also in the House, that they will not be getting their votes. That, especially if you're in a Republican district, if you are a Republican, if you have a Republican senator or a congressperson, it is high time that you let them know that their jobs are on the line if they don't vote for sanctions against Russia, and if they don't vote for sanctions that include sanctions against India and sanctions against China for buying that oil and keeping the Russian economy alive. Because this is what will end that war. The sanctions that are currently in front of that Senate in the Russian sanctions package, that is how this war ends, with Russia facing economic crashes because they're reliant on that money right now. They've turned the whole thing into a war machine, and they will continue this war as long as that oil keeps being bought, that they can continue fighting this war, producing more weapons, and then sending more people to their graves in both Ukraine and in their army, because they can continue the war once these oil sanctions are until these oil sanctions are put in place. So this is an important time. Americans should not just look at this as just some bad theater production, Donald Trump being played by his Russian puppet master. This is 1938. This is Chamberlain. This is the same kind of time. Now, certainly, Donald Trump did not appease this dictator this time, but we can't let that possibility ever continue. Because one thing that's clear today is that Putin owns Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is the puppet, is the lapdog of Vladimir Putin. Again, please support everyone on Substack that is speaking the truth, is speaking truth to power. It takes a lot of guts these days to be out there and fight these machines, because this is a very dangerous group of people. As you know, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin do not represent a group of very nice people in the Russian mob. And so, whoever's speaking out is speaking out and taking a lot of risk in doing it. And I implore you to please support them, to make sure other people know about what we're doing here on Substack. Share this broadcast, share everything that me and my colleagues are doing. Make sure that there is a broad understanding of what this network of people on Substack is doing, because it is countering this incredibly dangerous mainstream media that continues to treat everything like it's standard play over here. This is not standard play. This is not what normally happens. It's time for the mainstream media to realize that they need to change their channel too, change the way they're doing it and do their jobs, or we here are going to start taking on the mainstream media. It's appalling what we're seeing on MSNBC, on CNN, this basic whitewashing of what is historic events taking place, where America's being sold out to the Russian president. And I implore every Democratic leader who can hear this to stand up for Ukraine, to stand up against Russia. Let's all call for those sanctions to be implemented. That was the threat that we had against Vladimir Putin up until last week. Donald Trump said that last Friday he was going to introduce those sanctions, and he has not introduce those sanctions. Now he's laying out another plan, another delay, yet another delay. How long is this delay going to be for? And how many Ukrainians are going to die in the process? While Vladimir Putin plays for time, as he's able to do now, because he owns Donald Trump. If Donald Trump is as tough as people think he is, if he said there are going to be severe consequences, let's see those severe consequences. Let's see those sanctions be put up against Russia. Let's see it happen as soon as tomorrow. This is the time to do it, and everyone needs to be pushing hard that your Congress people pass that legislation. That is our coverage from the Alaskan Summit, or call it what you will, the Alaskan Puppet Theater, whatever you want to call it. Thank you for being here. We will continue, of course, pushing this agenda and the agenda of democracy, the agenda of freedom in every way possible. And we'll continue to do that on every channel that we have, but also here on Substack. You can check out my work at Narativ.org, and I guarantee you this week you'll be blown away when we put out our new coverage of Greatest Heist, where I go deep, and I've been researching this in great detail, into the connections between Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein and the Russian mob. And they all go back to the man who is Vladimir Putin's boss. And all of that is coming out this week on The Greatest Heist. So please check out Narativ.org, Narativ.org. Have a great weekend, everybody. We shall see you again soon.